Our American Lands presents his 30 by 30 reel or conspiracy. Oh, it's real.
This is a plan by the US government to take 30% of America's land completely out of production by the year 2030. This would mean that 30% of the land in this country will be placed into federal conservation, and it would essentially be idled. There will be no grazing, no farming, no drilling, no fishing, no developing, basically just no human activity at all. And while the current aim is to take 30% of America's land by the year 2030, once that's actually achieved, the next step will be to take 50% of America's land by the year 2050, the 50 by 50 plan. It's sort of a rolling project with the ultimate goal being for the federal government to own the majority of the land in America and to make that land inaccessible to the people in order to, of course, save the planet.
Hard to believe? Hold on to your hat. Here are examples of NGOs and the Biden administration's plans to implement 30 by 30.
Scientists tell us that in order to solve the climate crisis, we need to not only preserve existing wild spaces, but also protect more nature. A lot more nature. In the US alone, we need to protect about 30% of our remaining lands and waters by 2030. That's why Sierra Club and our allies are launching the 30 by 30 campaign. With only 12% of our country's lands currently protected, reaching that goal means more neighborhood green space, more wilderness, and everything in between. Protecting those forests and public lands and green spaces could reduce greenhouse gases by more than 20%. Right now, dirty fuel extraction on public lands is polluting our earth and tipping the climate scales. That's why Sierra Club has been fighting dangerous oil and gas leasing on public lands for years. Led by tribal nations and in coalition with partners, we've had major successes over the years. Coalition efforts have stopped dirty fuel leasing near Chaco Canyon National Monument, Great Sand Dunes National Park in Colorado, and Nevada's Ruby Mountains. Protecting wild places will keep drilling and logging from polluting our air, filtering out existing pollutants, and provide protection for wildlife and people. There is a clear path to get to 30% protection. Federal, state, and local agencies can stop oil and gas leasing and other destructive practices on public lands, designate more parks and national monuments, and prioritize the conservation values of tribal nations. Together, we can achieve this big, bold goal to protect 30% by 2030 and stop climate change.
Let's examine that video. All of our public lands already are federally protected. It implies that CO2 is a pollutant. Truth be told, CO2 did not become bad until 2009 when the Obama administration deemed it. Stop climate change, quote unquote, laughable. The climate has changed since time began. So, 30 by 30 is just a thing in the United States, right? Not so much. This insanity is global.
What does it mean to protect 30% of lands and waters? That is the key target in the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework that Canada is implementing through its new bill, the Nature Accountability Act. Protecting 30% of lands is critical if we are to halt and then reverse the biodiversity crisis. However, we can't just choose 30% of lands and waters and declare them protected. We have to make sure those lands are protecting the most at-risk and endangered ecosystems. And these ecosystems are some of the places that are most highly sought after by industry. And so that means we must change the status quo and we must ensure a diversity of ecosystems and the species that they support are protected if we are to truly meet Target 3, protecting 30% of lands and waters by 2030.
But who is falling for those buzzwords like biodiversity crisis, ecosystems, and protection? Hopefully not you.
The UK government has committed to protecting 30% of its land and sea by 2030. 27% of UK land and 38% of its seas are covered by at least one protected area designation, which can lead us to believe that the target will be easily met. However, these areas vary in the extent to which they deliver for nature. For example, less than 1% of inshore waters are highly protected against fishing activity. So, how are protected areas delivering for nature recovery in the UK? Find out in the BES's Protected Areas Report.
Under post-2020 global biodiversity framework, there is a concept of 30 by 30. What does that mean? It aims to preserve 30% of the world's land and sea by 2030. So 30% of the land and sea to be protected by the year 2030, and therefore it is called as 30 by 30. Very important topic under your environment, extremely important for your upcoming NET and UPSC examinations. Do follow the links below for more preparation material. Have a wonderful day ahead.
Yep, right on their own website. The San Luis Valley Ecosystem Council openly advocates for 30 by 30.
We're also making history by confronting the climate crisis, not denying it. I don't think any of you think there's no longer a climate crisis. At least I hope you don't. I'm taking the most significant action ever on climate in the history of the world. I'm cutting our carbon emissions in half by 2030, creating tens of thousands of clean energy jobs like the IBEW work is building and installing 500,000 electric vehicle charging stations. Conserving 30% of America's lands and waters by 2030.
Another one of Biden's first actions after taking office was to halt all new oil and gas leases on federal lands for 60 days. Tomorrow, we're told, he'll extend that moratorium. It's just one more way that Biden is trying to reverse the stance of the Trump administration, which oversaw a dramatic increase in domestic drilling and production before the pandemic. That was a centerpiece of Trump's America First agenda. Now, currently, there are about 26 million acres of federal land that are under lease to private oil and gas developers. About half of that actually produces anything. But in just 1 year, it generated more than $3 billion in federal royalties, rental payments, and bids. Now, under Biden's order, existing leases are likely to continue. New ones would be banned, but already the energy industry is up in arms. They're warning that more than 1 million jobs could be at risk if this moratorium is made permanent. But the Biden administration sees this action, along with the flurry of executive orders that we're expecting to come tomorrow, as crucial to not just combating climate change, but also to transitioning to the economy of the future. During the campaign, Biden had outlined a $2 trillion climate plan that included investments in infrastructure, auto, sustainable agriculture, along with solar, wind, and electric vehicles. So, Shep, that could form the backbone of the broader economic recovery plan that Biden has said he'll unveil next month.
Within the Inflation Reduction Act, the bill allocated $7.5 billion for 500,000 EV charging stations, but to date, only 7 were built. Where is the rest of the taxpayers' money? They want to end oil, gas, and coal in favor of unreliable green energy. Billions globally could starve and freeze to death. Eliminating oil and gas will switch the entire global power structure in a race to the most destructive mining practices for the non-renewable metals and minerals to manufacture lithium batteries and solar panels. Well, that sums it up. We're doomed. Or has the last 30 years been an orchestrated illusion? All to rewild the West. This agenda would end people living in rural America forever. Our public lands closed to the public. End of 30 by 30 Part 1. Part 2 will examine how 30 by 30 is and could impact Colorado if we sit back and let it happen. As always, thanks for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. Go to OurAmericanLands.com for more info. Our American Lands is a 501c3 nonprofit that depends on viewers like you to carry on the fight against these bureaucrats and non-governmental organizations. If you can spare $5, $10, or $20, it goes a long way to prevent these land grabs.